I got a message recently from someone wanting to know how to set up a More Me headphone mix for musicians for a tracking session. A More Me headphone mix allows musicians to hear themselves a little bit louder in context of the mix during a tracking session to aid in their performance. A More Me headphone mix can be easily set up in the Cubase control room section. So let's go to our device menu, and we can select VST Connections. This can also be opened and closed by hitting the F4 key from your function keys. We want to select your studio tab on the far right hand side, and if you don't have it activated, what you want to do is to turn this on. In the Outputs tab, it's probably a good idea to have a stereo output defined, but when you go to the studio, to right-click and add a monitor and actually set your VST connection there. If I want to communicate with the musicians during the tracking process, it's helpful to have a talkback mic. I could right-click and let's add a talkback mic, and I could define an input on my audio interface where the microphone is connected so that I can communicate with the musicians. To set up the independent headphone mixes or Q mixes, again, right-click. Let's go to Add Q. And let's say in this song I have vocals. I'm going to right-click again to add our third Q mix for guitars. We also have bass. And drums. Now I'm going to open up my mix console because I like to do this in conjunction with the mix console and control room. So I'm going to hit F3, or you could go to your devices menu and go to your mix console. And if we want to see the control room, if you don't see the control room, there's a little setup window in the upper right hand corner here. And then what we could do is click there, and we click on the little checkbox for control room. And now I could see my 4 independent headphone mixes here for my vocals, guitar, bass, and drums. We see a racks icon here. We want to make sure that Q sends are enabled directly here. And now we can see our 4 independent Q sends. Now how this works is, as we want to send a particular track, let's say our bass track, if I wanted to send it to the guitarist headphone mix, I could turn that on and send the level. And doing that across a large mix would be tedious at best. So there's some great shortcuts to really set up the Q mix. So we have a rough mix that we're listening to in our control room, but it's not set up as a More Me headphone mix. I'm going to select the channel all the way to the left, the channel all the way to the right. And I'm going to select, and that will select all the channels in between. Going into the control room, right click, and then you'll see all Qs. And what I want to do is to activate the Q sends for all of the tracks. Right click in the control room again. And what I want to do is to use the current mix levels for all of the tracks. And that's going to mimic the volumes that I have in my mixer across all the tracks. And lastly, let's use the current pan settings. So right now I have 4 different headphone mixes set up, but they're all set to mimic exactly what's going on in the control room mix. So if I want to set up the More Me headphone mix, I'm going to activate my quick link here in my mix console. I'm going to select all of my drum tracks. And now that quick link is turned on, I'm going to feed more signal to the drummer's headphone mix of the drum channels. I'll go to the bass. Let's add more bass to our bassist headphone mix, and we'll slide over and we'll just add guitar parts as well. So now I'll take the guitars and we'll just add more guitars. Now, we mentioned that we had set up a talkback earlier. I could activate the talkback here by clicking on this button. I could click on each of the Q mixes here, like so, and I could activate the talkback. So if I wanted to communicate with everyone except the drummer, I could now talk to the whole band, and the drummer won't hear this communication. If I wanted to have the talkback for the drummer and no one else, I could just bypass. So you could pick which headphone mixes your talkback signal gets routed to. Also, we have our metronome set up. So let's say our drummer wants to hear the click track in their headphone mix, the bass player wants to hear the click track, and a guitar player does, but we don't want the click track to bleed through on our beautiful condenser mic for the vocalist. So we could have the vocalist not hear the click track in their headphone mix. We see the cue mixes listed here in the control room, and this allows us to actually hear the independent cue mixes in the control room that each musician is hearing. So let's go ahead and take a quick listen to each of the musicians. So now if I want to listen to my drummer's headphone mix, to the bass player's headphone mix, to our guitar player's headphone mix, and to the mix in our control room. So as you see, it's very easy to set up different more me headphone mixes or cue mixes for musicians using the control room in Cubase. And the beauty of this system is also that it is saved with the project. So if you wanted to go back and do overdubs a couple days later, the same exact cue mix is integrated with the system. If you have found this video helpful, please feel free to like the video and to subscribe to the channel.